Hi, I'm Frank Tybush. I'm a filmmaker and I'm interested in history. Work brought me to Fells Point, a historic district in Baltimore, Maryland. It's one of the oldest communities in the country, and all around you see history being preserved and history dying. That got me thinking, how do people save history at risk? Hi, and welcome to the next episode of History at Risk. What you are watching is a re-edited version of the episode. Originally, we had a different opening and 4 interviews about a key figure in the War of 1812, Commodore Joshua Barney. We had the episode all ready to air, but for reasons outside of our control, we were forced to pull the interview that connected this figure and Fells Point. Not only did it throw us off guard, but an article about the episode for a local Fells Point newsletter, the Fells Pointer, had already gone to print. We were excited to show you this figure's connection to Fells Point, and we apologize that without this interview, the focus has shifted away from this historic community. What we have left are 3 interviews about Commodore Joshua Barney, but how does he relate to Fells Point? Well, not only was he a one-time resident of this community, but he was issued the first letter of marque in the War of 1812. That made him the first privateer of the war. And on that voyage, Barney captained a ship that was built here in Fells Point by Thomas Kemp. Barney later went on to be the Commodore of the Chesapeake Bay Flotilla and fought in the Battle of Bladensburg. It was in Bladensburg where we conducted the interviews that you are about to watch. We hope you enjoy. In trying to learn more about Joshua Barney and the War of 1812, I've come to the Battle of Bladensburg Visitor Center, a place where they're really trying to keep his memory alive. Let's go find out more. Hi.
Hi, Frank.
Thank you. Thank you for talking to us today. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself and what this place is?
Okay. I'm Richard Brown. I'm a part-time employee here at the Maryland National Capital Parks. This facility here is called the Bladensburg Waterfront Park, and we're part of the Star-Spangled Banner Trail that National Parks supports. And this goes all the way to Baltimore, up and across into the Eastern Shore. It's primarily a Maryland trail, okay? And what we have here in this visitor center is we try to sort of cover the War of 1812, okay, in terms of what happened, and in particular, what happened right up the river here. Whether famous or infamous, the Battle of Bladensburg took place within sight of where we are right now. 200 years ago, this was 40 feet deep.
Oh, wow.
And ships came up here. This was a major tobacco port and an inspection port for Maryland for tobacco. The British had not gotten over the loss of the colonies by any means, and had most British military and naval people had a real antipathy towards Americans, okay? They got to Bladensburg around maybe around 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Now this is after, in August. This is August in Maryland, and George Bleeg, one of the characters from the 85th, he's a second lieutenant, talks about the heat in Maryland. It was different because he had been fighting in Spain. There it was dry heat. Here he comes and gets this heat, and it's so damp, and these guys are dressed in their uniform with wool, their tight collars, and men are falling out left and right. There's a lot of stragglers, okay. They get to Bladensburg, and there is 5,000 militia opposing them. Well, unfortunately, those 5,000 men had been marching back and forth because General Widner, who was a cousin to the governor, he didn't know anything about leading men, okay? It was a political appointment.
Right.
And so he had heard, oh, they're here, oh, they're there. And so he moves his men. By the time they finally settled in Bladensburg, his men were exhausted, okay? Not only that, when he set up the defensive line, he set it on the other side of the bridge, okay? So they didn't burn the bridge, you know? And so, I mean, the military mistakes are, you know, and also part of Monroe came to the battleground. He moves the second line of defense, which was 50 yards from the first line, he moves it a half mile back. And that's the end of the battle.
Yeah.
And not only that, when the British when they first attacked over the bridge, the Americans fired on them and forced them to retreat. But they also had something that really scared the Americans, and that was the Congreve rocket. Now, Congreve rockets, you couldn't hit the broadside of a barn with a Congreve rocket. You couldn't aim it anywhere. But what it did was so random that it scared the militias who were poorly trained, poorly led, and had really never been in battle before. Okay, so here come these rockets. They're making this whistling sound. Okay, and they're coming down, and you don't know where they're going to land. Okay, so they land here, they land there, and when they explode, they kill you. Okay, they do kill you. I mean, they're effective in that respect. Okay, and so the Americans, once the British start employing the Congreve rockets, and the British now proceed forward with vehemence, the Americans run. They had just captured the cannons that the Americans were originally using that did stop them at the bridge. They've captured these cannons, they've turned them around, and now they're firing at the Americans. Now they've got artillery, okay? So they get to the second line dissolves as well. They proceed up Bladensburg Road. They're coming up the hill, and who's at the top of the hill? This absolutely audacious, bold guy by the name of Joshua Barney, who's around 55 at this point, okay? He was born in 1759. So here's, and so he has brought his sailors and Marines from St. Leonard's Creek. He had a fleet of barges. These barges were between 50 and 75 feet long. And he had been attacking the British just continuously, with these barges and carronades. That's all they had was one cannon in the front. He's been fighting this fight with the British. The British know him. They know who he is, okay? And finally, they box him up in St. Leonard's Creek, and he realizes that he can't get out of this situation because they blocked it. So he burns his ships and then hauls the cannons all the way from down there, all the way up to here, all the way to Bladensburg.
Okay.
Okay. And he sets himself up at the top of a hill. Okay. Not only did he fire the cannons up, but then he charged the British. He only had 500 men. Okay, so they withdrew. But on his flanks, there was militia guarding him. And they withheld for a while, but don't forget, these were trained, experienced troops. They persisted, and that was enough to make them flee. And once they fled, the wagon with his supplies fled with the militia.
Oh, man.
So there went his ammunition. So he told his men, retreat. Now they didn't run, they retreated. And he had been wounded. He had a ball in the thigh. So he couldn't move anywhere. And Charles Ball stayed with him, and so did another Marine. But everybody else retreated. When the British get to him, okay, they know who he is. Okay, and one of the sergeants reports, this is Joshua Barney. And so Ross and Cockburn come over to him, and they parole him on the spot.
Why don't we know more about Joshua Barney? And why should we know more about Joshua Barney?
Well, he was a hero both of the Revolution and of the War of 1812. We don't hear about him, the Revolution. He was on the Andrea Doria, which was the first ship to receive a salute as a colonial ship of the new nation of America, the United States, receives a salute from the Dutch Antilles, okay? And he was aboard that ship he was a master mate, I think, on board that ship. Subsequent to that, he was on the Wasp and the Hornet, which were sloops of war, and his actions in the Delaware Bay against the British earned him a rank of lieutenant at the age of 16. Men waited till they were 30 back in those days before they could become lieutenants.
Wow.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, you can't even imagine somebody 16 nowadays doing, being in battle at all, but he was a lieutenant at 16.
Well, imagine this. Imagine being 15-year-olds. Think of yourself at 15 or whatever, and being on the ocean, and being a ship's master, not a master, but being a master mate on a ship at 15. So that means you were in charge of all the men, okay? And your captain dies. So all of a sudden, at 15, you are now the captain of a sailing ship. And if you read any accounts of sailing ships, I mean, this required a great deal of skill. I mean, he's a smart guy. He understood maritime law. He understood all these things. And now the Americans are at war. By the time he gets back, he gets stopped by a British ship and all the weapons on board ship are taken off of his merchantman. Okay, which begins a sort of a lifelong anger and antipathy towards the British on Barney's part. He was captured 3 times, okay, and imprisoned by the British. Once he was paroled in Baltimore. He was treated very fairly by the captain. He was actually treated like an officer, as was the custom. The other time he was taken with his crew all the way to Portsmouth, England, and placed in prison in Portsmouth, England. That time he was treated very, very poorly. His story is, his escape from Portsmouth prison is just a story in itself. And I don't know if we can get into that. But when he, in another situation, at the end of the revolution, he is in a battle with a ship called the General Monk, which had been the General Washington, had been taken by the British, renamed the General Monk, and had been blockading the Delaware Bay. Barney is hired by the Pennsylvania legislature, okay, to protect a flotilla of merchantmen and get them out into the Atlantic so that they could then disperse and sell their wares wherever they wanted to. And so, I mean, because commerce was the lifeblood of port cities like Philadelphia and Boston and other places. Barney was also very successful in the privateer Rossi.
And he was, I believe, he got the first letter of marque.
He may have. I'm not sure of that. Okay. But they were. I mean, he was an entrepreneurial character as well as being a patriot. He was really a very, very unusual character. Okay, but he earned about $1.5 million for his sponsors.
Is that? And I just want to clarify. Is that $1.5 million back in 1800s?
Yes, back in 1800s.
So that's without inflation.
That's without inflation.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's the ships that he brought in and were sold, and the cargoes that were sold. Yeah.
Okay. Wow. You talked about the Battle of Bladensburg, but is there more with Barney in the War of 1812?
Barney's involvement with the War of 1812 ends with the Battle of Bladensburg.
Okay.
Okay. He subsequently goes back to Baltimore and then goes to Pittsburgh, and his family goes with him, and they decide they're going to purchase some land in Kentucky. They get on and this is about 4 years later, he's accumulated, at this point I don't know how much he has in terms of funds, but he had accumulated. At different times he was well-to-do, and then he would lose it. Okay, in commerce, generally speaking. Okay,
that can happen.
Well, his ship would be attacked by pirates or a privateer and things like that. And so some days his flag was up, and some days it was down. You know, so but he eventually dies on that trip from a thrombosis from the wound in his thigh. Yeah, that's what eventually kills him. He's a very honorable man. If you treat Barney well, he will treat you well as also, okay? And at no time am I aware that he did anything that was dishonorable.
You're wearing what looks like period piece clothing.
Yeah, this is
if you could talk about this.
Yeah, this was common. These type of breeches with the buttons and the suspenders were military, and also common for every day. This was not unusual. This is what I'm wearing right now.
Now, why are you dressed like this?
Well, I'm dressed like this to tell the story of what happened. Tell the story of late 18th century and early 19th century America, and to tell about the Battle of Bladensburg. The militia at the Battle of Bladensburg were composed of common folk who were obligated to be part of the militia. They were poorly trained. They met once a month, and the British could fire 3 rounds out of this thing in a minute. The Americans are lucky if they get one off in a minute. Okay.
And it's kind of interesting that you dress like this. Do you feel it pulls people in and gets people more interested?
Yeah. If you can talk about what it was like and demonstrate different things, what people did, it gets their interest, especially children, because you can't just talk to them. You've got to show them something. Okay.
My name is John Giannetti. I've lived in this area all my life. I served in the Marine Corps. It was the only time I was ever away from this area. I'm with my brother, partner in this company, Genetti Studios, where we are. We're at Genetti Studios now. And it's a business that my father started. We call ourselves architectural sculptors. We don't sculpt figures, but we sculpt architectural features like you can see here on the walls. I personally have been very involved in historic preservation most of my adult life. And about more than 40 years ago, we started down in Bladensburg restoring an old historic tavern.
My name's Joanna Blake. I'm a sculptor here in Brentwood, Maryland, and I've been sculpting for about 10 years, and this is the most recent project.
Which is quite impressive.
Thank you.
Could you tell us a little bit about the project?
Yeah, so this is the sculpture to commemorate the Battle of Bladensburg for the War of 1812, which we're about to have the 200th anniversary of, coming up pretty soon. And I was approached by the Amen Trust to create a memorial, and this is it.
The Amen Trust is a historic preservation organization. That's what we were founded to do. We've worked on the restoration of some of the historic structures that are still in Bladensburg, and there are several of them. We sort of came up with the idea of having a monument on the 200th anniversary.
Originally, when the Trust approached me about the project, it was that, the Battle of Bladensburg is a huge event in American history, and there's really nothing in this area that commemorates that acknowledges that something important happened here.
Which is funny because, yeah, it's Bladensburg, you would think.
Right. So, and in Bladensburg, we have the Peace Cross, which is a memorial to World War I. And there's a Korean memorial in Vietnam and 9/11 and World War II, but nothing to commemorate Bladensburg. So it's been about 200 years, and it's time for something to be there. The challenge was, for me as an artist, is how do you commemorate a defeat? And I went with John Giannetti of the Amen Trust to Baltimore, and we looked at some of the 1812 stuff there, some of which were started in 1814, as early as 1814 or 1815. And everything there just has a different feel to it because, things turned out differently in Baltimore. So everything is really triumphant. There's like this, gilded figure on top of the Francis Scott Key Memorial, and everything's tall and kind of triumphant. And I really wanted to convey with the architecture that this was a defeat. And originally the memorial was called Undaunted in Defeat. Nobody liked that. So now it's called Undaunted in Battle, which will be the inscription across the bottom.
Well, Barney was left on the battlefield there, and one of his men stayed with him. But the British came up, and very quickly they call the commander of the British forces, Major General Robert Ross, and Admiral Cockburn. He was the Navy part of it, but it was Ross that really conducted the battle and forced the bridge and won the battle. And so when he walked up and he said, "Man, you guys really put up a fight, it was amazing." And so they have even recorded the wordings that were used. Barney said, "Well, you've got me now." And Cockburn and Ross said, "No, look, we're sorry to see that you're wounded. You guys put up a heck of a fight. We knew it was somebody other than the militia that would put up such a fight." And so they paroled him right on the spot. They were reaching out to their fallen foe, sort of a magnanimous gesture of chivalry. And they took him into Bladensburg. But one of the things, there were 70 British soldiers that were on the battlefield that couldn't leave. They were so wounded so poorly. So they told Barney, they said, "Look, we'll put you in charge of these guys. Make sure that they get proper care." So Barney was sort of looking after the British wounded.
Originally, it started off with drawings. I did several different sketches. This is one of the original watercolor sketches right here. Yeah.
Where did you go from there?
Okay, so from that drawing, I presented it to the trust, and then I also had a couple of historians look at it, who told me right away, well, they would have all been wearing hats. Barney, it doesn't matter that it was August 24th and hot as hell, like he would have, he would not have unbuttoned his coat. So that everybody, they needed to be, dressed in their uniforms in a very specific way. But then ultimately I found out that Barney was wounded in the right thigh, and we wanted to show that. And then the other thing is it sort of makes more sense on the site if the figures are facing in the direction that the British would have been approaching from.
Yeah.
So that was, that was two important things which sort of made me flip the composition. I actually found out that there were 1812 reenactors, and so I was able to meet some of them at Fort McHenry, the living history guys, and asked them if they would be willing to model for me, which they did. We tried several different poses, and these guys were gracious enough to come back to the studio in all of these uniforms with all of this equipment. Rather than showing militiamen in retreat, I thought that Joshua Barney, the hero of the battle, should be the main figure of it. And then when I learned that he also had Marines with him and his flotilla men, it seemed like it would be much more interesting, instead of doing a three-dimensional sculpture in the round, to do some kind of relief sculpture that could, represent one of each of the groups represented there.
It's kind of almost humbling to think of commemorating a defeat. I'd heard about the battle and about how it had led to the eventual victory at Baltimore because of the failings.
Right.
You could almost say because of the failings of this battle, it led to the victory at Baltimore, and it's humbling and to remember something like this and how even in defeat we could rise up.
Yeah, 1812 was really the second battle for American independence, and so I think the importance of it is lost on a lot of people. So there's the quarter scale model, and then once that was approved, I had it taken to the foundry, and it was scanned and digitally enlarged in foam.
Okay.
Just the figures. Yeah, so it's actually fairly light. There's maybe 200 pounds of clay on there, and that's it.
This foam, and then clay is on top of the foam.
Yeah, the foam is a type of armature underneath it. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's an amazing technology.
It's an interesting time for all that. So how long did it, from basically like the start of designing this to this point, how long was that?
I think John approached me maybe in November or December of 2009.
Wow.
Once you figure out the design, then sculpting it is the easy part, really. You know. It's at least the more straightforward.
The more straightforward part.
Yeah.
Now, what's the journey from here of this statue?
Well, soon they're going to come in. The foundry is going to come and pick the piece up. Use this chain hoist and there's a break in the railing to turn it sideways and take it over the railing, and they're going to back a truck down the alley and load it up, and it will go to the foundry, and it'll be cast in bronze.
Okay, and then do you know about how long that's going to take?
And that process takes about 4 to 6 months.
Okay, so and once this leaves, is that it for you? Is there more you're doing on this?
Well, I will sort of shepherd it through the process at the foundry. They'll make a rubber mold on it, and then they'll pour waxes into it, and I'll need to inspect the wax to make sure that all of the details are there and that everything came out correctly. And then they'll make ceramic shells on that, and then once they pour the bronze, there'll be a metal inspection to do. And it's cast in pieces, so it will be reassembled, and the joints will be welded, and then they'll chase the welds so that you can't see them, sandblast it, and then put a patina on it, and there'll be a patina inspection. Bronze is like 95% copper,
right.
And so when it's left out in the elements, it gets that kind of old penny look to it, which they can accelerate with chemicals.
Okay.
So we want it to look like it's always been there.
You know, these guys marched out to Bladensburg to put their life on the line. The soldiers, sailors, and Marines. And this monument is to try to at least remember these guys. And we retreated from the battlefield, but not everybody retreated. And those guys that fought and died and were wounded, I think they should be remembered. And I think that's what this is all about. So in a way, like you were talking about earlier about history, this sort of will bring people's idea that, you know, you have to stand and fight sometimes.
Yeah.
And so that's what we're talking about here.
No, I find researching history to be really interesting and kind of like going down a rabbit hole. I started this episode off trying to find out Fells Point's role in the War of 1812, and through that I found Joshua Barney, a person I never heard of before and probably would never have heard of if I didn't start looking at this, but really he is the quintessential American hero. Ship battles, land battles, privateering, fighting through being injured, even prison breaks. He's somebody that should be talked about that isn't. And that got me wondering how many other unsung heroes there really are out there. And I'll keep that in mind whenever I research, to always look for those people that I don't normally know about. Well, next episode, I'm going to stay in Fells Point, and I think I'm going to try to take a look at the local wildlife here. See you then.